Hi everyone, in today's video I'm going to show you how to paint watercolor aster. Aster is one of the birth month flowers for the month of September, and I cannot wait to show you how to paint this beautiful flower. For this project I am using a piece of Arches 140 pound cold press watercolor paper that I've cut down to size. I'm also using my limited palette of watercolors from Sparrow. This is cad yellow, magenta, cerulean, indigo, and sap green. I will also be using my round brushes today. I'm not using my size 10. I am only using my size 4 round brush, and this one is from Princeton. Asters have a very large yellow center and small, thin purple petals coming off. So I want to establish the yellow center first so we can get a guide almost of where to put our purple petals. So I'm starting with my cad yellow almost straight from the palette, adding that in a textured circular shape to create the center of the flower, and then I'm dipping just slightly into the magenta that is on my palette to create a soft orange, and I am adding that around the base of my center as well. Now we're going to move on to painting the purple petals. I am using magenta and adding a touch of cerulean to get a light lavendery purple that still leans very much pink. And I do this because I want to start with a light, bright color for the petals so that I can layer deeper colors of purple on in shadowy areas as I continue. Now I love using the size 4 for asters because if I drag from the center of the flower and out, it pretty much makes the perfect petal shape. You don't want them to be completely individual. Some of them can connect and touch at the center, and then we're just going to drag out to create the shape that we want. I don't mind if my yellow center is still a little bit wet. I like a bit of the yellow and purple bleed, but because yellow and purple are complementary colors, if they mix too much, they will create brown. So I don't mind if there's a little bit of brown around the edges of the center because it feels very natural that there would be some type of brown tone, but we don't want too much of that blending so that the purple or the yellow is overtaken with muddiness. We want both of them to stay pretty bright. Now, depending on the direction that you drag your brush, it will give you different shaped petals. So if you drag from the center out, it will give you a wider, rounder petal. And if you drag from the outside into the center, it tends to be a little bit thinner because we use more of the tip of our brush. So just keep that in mind when you're creating the petals and how you drag the brush. You can spin your paper around if you want to consistently drag from the center of the flower outward. Now, this one that we've painted on the center left is a great example of an aster that is facing fully toward us. We can see the center and all of the sides. Now I'm going to paint an aster on the upper right that has more of a side view. So you can see I've made the center more of a cone, still using that cad yellow with a touch of magenta to create the orange along the bottom. I mixed together my light purple color using magenta with a touch of cerulean, and I am dragging these petals a little bit more curved on the side rather than straight. And I'm making them pretty much normal as I come around this edge, but they're a bit shorter than the other one. Then as I come across, we are going to make the petals shorter and shorter as they are being less seen and kind of covered up by the center and the angle around the upper side of this flower. So the shapes are really almost like dots as we create these strokes, and the flower petals that are in the back are just hardly seen. And you can see that asters have a lot of petals. It's a different flower than a daisy, where we're making lots of long petals that have texture. So to create that illusion that we can hardly see those petals on the other side because this is angular, we need to create very short petals as we curve along that backside. Now I'm creating a little bud of petals that haven't opened yet, so I'm layering together a few of these long strokes that are kind of curved in, creating a tiny bit of white space between some of them so that we can see the distinction between these petals. We're going to let those petals completely dry before we add more layers and details, so we're going to move on to the greenery for a bit. I want to start with a very light, bright green so that I can add, again, more details and layers as I go forward. So this is cad yellow with sap green mixed together, and we are doing simple curves in the stems, connecting them and creating a thicker green base at the bud. Once you have painted all your stems and everything is connected, then you can really get a feel for where the balance needs to be with leaves. There's a lot of weight on the left side because of that large aster that we painted first, and so we need to balance that with the leaves on the right side. I started with a small leaf, and I'm going to add some more. While my greenery is still wet though, I can pick up even the same wash that I've been using of this light green and tap it into the green that I've already created to create more variation. The one leaf felt odd, so I added a few straggly leaves to go with it to help balance, and then I put a more medium leaf to balance along the bottom, and once I did this, it felt very complete. I didn't need to add any more greenery at this point. But I did mix in some indigo into my green to start adding some of these deeper values, especially while it's still wet, so I can get some nice blends. So once I have that deeper indigo green, I can tap that color at the base where the leaves are connected to the stems, at the stems where it's connected to the flower, any other connection points, or where it feels natural. I also like to use this deeper color to create textures and little bits coming off the stem so it feels very organic. We're going to let all of our greenery dry while we add more details to the flower part. Now, I needed to figure out where my light source was coming from. I have it coming from the top of the paper, and so all of my shadows are going to be on the bottom half of the center and the flower. So for the centers, I'm mixing cad yellow with a touch of magenta to get this rich orange color, and I am focusing this color on the bottom half, almost in a very rough moon shape, to create a 3D effect. And I'm stippling this color up into the center of the flower to represent the texture that is present. For the petals, I am using the same color combination of magenta and cerulean, but this time we're leaning a little bit more into the pigment. It's still watery, it's still not a super dark, intense wash, but it's just a step above that first initial layer that we have so that we can start building shadows. The name of the game is building. This isn't going to be our last layer, so we don't want it to be super dark at this point. Now our shadows are going to be along this bottom half of the flower because our light source is coming from the top of the paper. So we are slowly creating shadowy spots within the petals without creating too much. We don't want every petal to be in shadow. So pick and choose some of the petals, and then we're going to create some smaller, thinner lines of shadow on the petals underneath petals that are on top of it to create a layered effect. As everything starts to dry, you're going to add more and more blue into your petal mixture to get cooler tones for shadow building. So as I add more cerulean into my purple mixture, I can go over different areas in my shadowy section of my flower to create the feeling of depth and shadow on that side. The upper side of the flower is not going to be completely devoid of color and layering though. We need to use very light washes of magenta, maybe even very light washes of the purple or blue up in the bright side of the flower as well to give it balance, to create texture, to have some variation. Even though we're going heavier in pigment and heavier in blue on the bottom, doesn't mean we should avoid adding color on the top half of the flower. And you can see here I kind of overlayered into the center, so just using some clean water I can scrub out some of the purple which is perfect because it kind of gives a little bit of a brown color in the center and we can create some texture. So even if you overlayer, you can fix that very easily with this flower. Now we're going to do the same thing on the upper flower. We're going to focus more of the deeper colors on the bottom half of the flower where our shadows are, using magenta and cerulean, and then start leaning more into the cerulean to get the cooler blue tones in the shadowy areas. Now, I think the balance of this comes from remembering we are layering. We want light, medium, and dark values within our petals, even in some of the shadowy areas. We're not completely covering up all of the light petals, and we're not perfectly matching our dark strokes on top of the light strokes that we did on the bottom. We can create new darker strokes, and we can create smaller, thinner lines to represent shadows on those petals. Let your petals dry and let's focus on some more contrast in the center of our flower. This is cad yellow and magenta, but we're leaning a lot more into the magenta to get a stronger orange color, and we are tapping this color, stippling it so that we have some texture along that same bottom curve at the bottom of the centers. And I'm being very careful with how I bring this color up into the center, but if you feel like you have too much pigment on your brush, you can always rinse your brush or tap off some of the pigment from your brush and then use more of a damp brush to bring some of that pigment up into the center in a lighter wash. So we can kind of use the pigment we've already put on the paper to bring it up and feather it out so that it's not so intense. And then to complete the high contrast, now that we have our medium value of orange and we've left that super light yellow area, I added magenta right at the very edge of the shadow that we're creating at the base of the center between the petals. I added a few strokes of a deeper purple to the bud because I don't want to forget those petals and I want to make sure they have some contrast as well. And now we're going to dip into our cerulean, and we're pretty much using it straight from the well to create more depth of shadow, more contrast right where the petals are meeting the center. We can even glaze it over some of our petals to create more of a cool tone or purpley tone to the petals if they are too pink or they're too light. So I'm using this cerulean as a finishing color to make sure we have enough contrast and we have enough blue tones in our shadows. Once all of that is established, I really wanted a darker line between the center and the petals, and so that's when I pull out indigo. Magenta with a touch of indigo, and right at that very edge, textured, stippled, is the finishing line of high intensity contrast that I needed to move on. A few more swipes of deeper purple onto the bud so that again we have our light, medium, and dark values, and then we're going to do the same thing on the greenery, mixing in our sap green with some indigo and swiping this color over a few key places so that we have all of our different values present. Now I am painting these flowers as a monthly birth month flower project, so I am writing aster and September, but there is never a bad time to paint asters. They are such a beautiful flower. Thank you so much for painting asters with me. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know if you have any questions down below, and I will see you all next time. Bye guys.